Welcome to the Orton Gillingham Podcast, a BrainSpring production. Today, we'll speak with Dr. Ryan Lee James, a speech-language pathologist with expertise in reading disabilities, about her research on inequities in education, what we can do to improve literacy rates, and how we can make classrooms more equitable. Keep listening.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Orton Gillingham podcast. This is Esther, and I'm here by myself without Kara. Kara is on vacation, and she's enjoying herself in all kinds of exotic places, and I'm jealous of her. So next time she'll be back. But we're here today to talk about inequities in the classroom with Dr. Ryan Lee James. And Dr. Lee James is a speech and language pathologist. She's the chief academic officer and director of the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, which is part of the Atlantic Speech School. And her expertise is in language development, language disorders, reading disabilities, with an emphasis on African American English and other non-mainstream dialects. So welcome, Dr. Lee James. Can I call you Ryan, or would you like me to call you Dr. Lee James?
Please call me Ryan.
Okay, Ryan. Ryan, tell us a little bit about the Atlanta Speech School and what you do there.
Yeah, sure. So the Atlanta Speech School is now, 85 years old. We started in 1938 as a school for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. And at that time, our mission was to ensure that children who were deaf and hard of hearing had access to speech and language, but also would hopefully eventually have access to literacy. And so over the last 85 years, we have evolved into 5 programs on campus that serve children who are deaf and hard of hearing, who have early speech and language delay, or DLD, as we now talk about it in the speech language world. Mm-hmm. We also have a school, K6, for children who have a diagnosis of dyslexia or red flags for dyslexia. And we also have several clinics on our campus that serve the community: speech, OT, and audiology. Through the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy started in 2004, really with the sole mission of eradicating illiteracy. And so our schools are private and funded through tuition. The Rollins Center primarily is funded by philanthropy. And the goal of the Rollins Center is to really just provide teacher training, leader training, support for coaches, and really, we say all adults, all child-facing adults, because we really think about our work along a continuum, realizing that literacy or language learning or language acquisition doesn't just start when kids enter school, like kindergarten, right? That process starts in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, when the baby's auditory channel comes online. And we know that early sound awareness, right, is really the beginning of vocabulary and comprehension and phonemic awareness. And so we think about this work along a continuum through the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, through what Merriam-Wolfe and others in our field call deep reading. Far beyond, just basic proficiency as we measure it. I should also mention the Cox campus. The Cox campus, born out of the Rollins Center and Speech School, is our free online professional learning platform, where we are developing course content, instructional resources for those who are responsible for serving kids. And so we're really proud to say that content was just IDA accredited earlier in the year.
That's great. I love to hear you talk about that oral language, because that's a piece that when we talk about reading or literacy, sometimes that gets lost. That whole the importance of the oral language piece is huge. And so I love that you guys are really focusing on that. You did mention some red flags. And so as a speech pathologist, what are some red flags from your perspective that it's kind of a unique perspective? We know what teachers see as red flags in the classroom for kids who might have dyslexia. But what about from your perspective as a speech language path?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think what research shows us is that children who go on to get a diagnosis of SLD or dyslexia, when we sort of backtrack in with the family, we hear them talking about a lot of similar early on red flags.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those red flags involve early difficulty with retrieval, even noted as early as 3 and 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we also see early difficulty with the acquisition of speech and language.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as a field, what we really have to do, teachers and all of us, not just SLPs, is really start to understand that early developmental piece
Mm-hmm.
because there are so many children who again, will go on to get a diagnosis of some sort. And when we sit and talk with that family and ask about those developmental milestones and
Mm-hmm.
ask about that early acquisition period, we hear families saying things like, yeah, and well, Ryan didn't really say her first word until she was 18 months. And even
Mm-hmm.
after that, it was really slow going.
Mm-hmm.
But those were things that either weren't picked up by the pediatrician or weren't picked
Mm-hmm.
up by early care and learning, if they were in that setting. And so I think, thinking about those early indicators that really are involved with speech and language and communication,
Mm-hmm.
is something really critical for us to turn our attention to as a
Mm-hmm.
field.
Yes. And as far as interventions go, I mean, when we think about structured literacy, and I was just at the IDA conference in Dallas, and it's all about structured literacy and interventions and those specific things. Is there something specific that SLPs do that kind of mesh with the structured literacy interventions that people do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think the answer to that is yes. I
Mm-hmm.
will say that as I sit here at the ASHA convention in
Mm-hmm.
Seattle, just stepped out of a school issues advisory board meeting, and we were talking about how can we better prepare our graduate SLPs to
Mm-hmm.
go into school settings, because there's also a bit of a disconnect there with what SLPs are getting access to. We learn a lot about language. We learn a lot about listening and spoken language.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do as much, depending on where you get your degree, which tends to also be the case with teachers,
Mm-hmm.
sort of dictates how much you get on the structured literacy side as an
Yes.
SLP. So
Yes.
we think in our environment, for example, at my school, we are seeking to hire SLPs who have that structured literacy experience
Mm-hmm.
because from your experience that in those structured literacy programs, oral language is not always emphasized. And so,
Right.
what SLPs have the ability to do
Mm-hmm.
is couple all of that structured language around, the written word to
Mm-hmm.
really couple that with those components of syntax and
Mm-hmm.
morphology
Mm-hmm.
and vocabulary breadth and depth
Mm-hmm.
that are really critical for that ultimate outcome of reading comprehension or deep reading comprehension.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I think SLPs are uniquely positioned because of our training and our understanding of language
Yeah.
and the phoneme and the sound system. But
Mm-hmm.
we do need to do a better job in graduate training programs of bringing that information together.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm wondering, when teachers in schools send their kids to SLP, they have to leave the classroom and go get help from a speech language pathologist. I'm not sure if not everybody might understand what they're doing in that session. What are their students doing in that session, and is what the SLP doing going to going to support what's going on in the classroom? I mean, is there a crossover? And we have SLPs in our we do professional development and structured literacy, and I love it when we have SLPs in our class because then everybody's on the same page. The teachers and the SLPs are kind of working together toward literacy, and so it's not always just about articulation, how to articulate this, speech sounds, but it goes so much deeper, I think. And so do you when you work with students, I mean, are you in the situation where you pull kids out and then you have a conversation with the teacher about what was done in the
Yeah,
session? Yeah. And so,
that's a great question. So in our school, or in our schools, so our school starts as early as 2 years old,
mm,
though from birth to two, we have caregiver programs,
mm-hmm,
and toddler programs at our school. But in all of the programs that I mentioned for our kids who are DHH, DLD, dyslexia,
mm-hmm,
we have SLPs who are co-teaching or
mm,
actually lead teaching and pushing into those classrooms alongside an OT.
that's great.
So most of what is and our OTs are leading lessons, on self-regulation, SEL, executive control. And so we really have what we would refer to as an IPP model, an interprofessional practice model, where our kids are receiving these services not in a pull-out fashion, but really integrated. Now,
Mm,
of course, we do have kids who may need more support, or their parents just elect for more support.
right,
In
right.
those instances, we do offer intervention, individual intervention,
Mm-hmm,
but most of the time, we are not operating kind of in that pull out fashion.
mm-hmm.
But remember that my school is an independent school.
Sure.
And so through the Rollins Center, when we are working in the community, in our community public schools, we do see that that is what's happening, that
Mm-hmm,
SLPs are pulling out.
mm-hmm,
Now, we can note the challenges with that.
mm-hmm,
What I will say is on this topic is that SLPs, again, taking it back to our graduate training programs,
mm-hmm,
we've got to do a better job in the teacher preparation world and in the SLP
mm-hmm.
preparation world to help um, to help all of us understand what the other folks are responsible for
Yes,
and
yes,
working on. And
yes.
so I really believe, and I think, evidence kind of points to this. If we had SLPs really pushing into tier one to
Mm-hmm,
help support that tier one curriculum, how
mm-hmm,
can we be building vocabulary breadth and depth?
mm,
How can we work with our students who are multilingual and learning several languages at a
mm,
time, while also trying to learn written English?
mm,
What are those phonemes that don't exist in their language, but
mm-hmm.
exist in the language of school that
Yes,
we need to really slow down and emphasize as we're going through our structured literacy curriculum? There's a
yes,
lot of opportunities that we're just not taking advantage
yes,
of.
yes.
And some of those reasons are because of the system, right? Like,
Sure.
well, when is an SLP going to find time to do that with
Right,
300 kids on a caseload? Or when is the teacher going to find time to do?
right.
But we can better use or not better use, maybe differently use our pre-planning time.
Mm,
There are opportunities for collaboration at the school level that we are just missing.
mm,
And so one thing that I also serve on the board of directors for the American Speech Language Hearing Association
mm,
as the vice president of speech language pathology practice.
mhm.
And one thing that I raise, often in our subcommittee meetings is thinking about our role with organizations like IDA, with
Mhm.
organizations like ILA
Mhm.
and the American Federation of Teachers
Mhm.
and other organizations, because I believe that SLPs can make a tremendous
Mm.
impact
Mhm.
on what we're seeing play out in the schools, because kids are getting referred and they're getting referred late. And for some of these challenges, we could have been on the front end of this in
Yes.
pre-K.
Yeah. I mean, it's all literacy, isn't it? I mean, it's all literacy, and it's that's just another aspect of it that needs to be pulled in and make it more complete. Absolutely. Um, so I hear you talking about, work with kids who EL kids possibly, and I would like you to talk a little bit about your research into inequities in the classroom. So tell us about what you are seeing as far as that goes.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing play out in classrooms across the country is, a symptom of what has existed in our country for many, many years, long before you, long
Mm-hmm.
before me, long
Mm-hmm.
before my parents and grandparents, in the sense that we have historically experienced inequities in our country around who has access and who does not. And we can think about education as a singular issue, but we know that who's had access to educational opportunity and who's had access to, say, for example, high quality healthcare. All of these public health issues kind of go hand in hand. And so though I think COVID has, or, the instance of COVID and the unfortunate instance of COVID in our country has kind of really brought these inequities back to the light for the broader country. But people like you and I who are steeped in this know that COVID may have exacerbated for certain demographics, but on a whole, we weren't doing so well pre-COVID.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think the issues that, that we're seeing in the classroom are just issues that have been around for in schools, issues that have been around for a long time. And though children are impacted and families, and then subsequently generations, we also know that teachers are really impacted. And all of this data that the National Center on Teaching Quality has been putting out over the last few years around access, teachers who have had access to the science of reading, teachers who have had access to the science of healthy brain development, teachers who have had access to science of language acquisition, and those who have not. And those who have not are not prepared. Dr. Tracy Whedon said something a couple of weeks ago that really stuck with me, that we are not equipping our teachers. We're not apprenticing them to win the war against illiteracy in the classroom. And so what happens is, what happens. We have this narrative that has persisted for, again, long before you and I, that certain groups of children can't learn.
Right.
Certain families don't care enough.
Right.
And we know that that's just not the truth.
Right.
What I will say is that what I see in the classrooms often is teachers who are in the field because they want to make a difference, and they want the access to the knowledge and skills and tools that they need to do that, which is why our organizations like ours, the collective, is so important, because we're providing that access to teachers who can then provide access to students. But, the last thing I'll say on the topic of inequity, just to not beat a dead horse, we know who's most impacted. Children who are Black and brown, children who are multilingual, children who are being reared in economic disadvantage. And it's time to stop talking about that.
Yes.
We know what the science of reading can do for all kids. Let's do that for all kids. Let's do it for all teachers.
Yes.
And so, yeah,
well,
long way to go, but we're headed in the right direction.
And the conversation is really coming to light. I mean, it's again, at the last couple conferences I've attended, there's been many breakout sessions dealing with with this topic. And many years ago you didn't see that. So it is coming to light, and it's amazing. It's time. It's just time. So as far as the kinds of inequities that you're seeing, when we talk about access to testing, dyslexia testing, if you have a student who speaks a non-mainstream dialect, what are some of the unique challenges they face when they're learning to read now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was glad to see that one in the notes that Michael sent.
Yes.
So just in the spirit of growing myself and how I talk about these issues, I want to just kind of flip your question a little bit. One thing that I see is incredible opportunity. And what I mean by that is, so I mentioned that I'm a speech language pathologist, and my doctoral research and work that I did when I was at a university as an assistant professor, developing my research program, it was very focused on African American English specifically, but also other non-mainstream dialects. One thing that we have seen since, the early 1920s, when sociolinguists really started researching different dialects, or that research was, I guess, being published, probably happening way before that, is that children who are navigating different dialects of a language or different languages tend to have really sophisticated language systems.
Mm.
And unfortunately, like many things, our school system, our way of testing and our way of educating doesn't really allow us to maximize
Mm-hmm.
what kids bring to school with them.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about all, 30 million word gap.
Yeah.
Kids don't come to school with this.
Mm-hmm.
Kindergartners aren't ready. And
Mm.
and that's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are so ready
Mm-hmm.
when they enter school, whether they've been in an early learning program or whether they've been at home with their families. Julie Washington talks about the language that children have been loved in.
Mm.
Children are ready. The
Mm-hmm.
question is, how can we get teachers in our system ready?
Yes.
And so I want to say that what we see from decades of research on this topic is that children who are navigating different language systems have sophisticated language skills,
Mm-hmm.
not just in the structure of language, like the phoneme and the
Mm-hmm.
morpheme and the syntax, but they also have sophisticated skills in the area of pragmatics that
Yes.
they that
Yes.
they know when the context is changing and they
Mm-hmm.
know when the speaker is doing something different, and
Mm-hmm.
they can match their pragmatics very early on, as early as
Mm-hmm.
preschool is what we see in research.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question about what we're seeing in the classroom is just like missed opportunities.
Yes.
Again, back to our teachers just not having what they need,
Mm-hmm.
is that teachers are not prepared to serve the majority of children who will be in front of them in the public schools. Our data says that an overwhelming amount of kids are coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
An overwhelming amount of kids are coming having had access to other languages other than English as their first.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing all of that,
Mm-hmm.
knowing all of those things, and I'm thinking about a small city in right outside of Atlanta, Marietta City,
Mm-hmm.
where the Rollins Center has done a lot of work with our partners in the school system. We were just there doing a school visit on Monday. There was a group of children in small group, maybe 5, whose first language was mum,
Mm.
and they were working on phonemes. They were working on phonemes, and
Mm-hmm.
their teacher was so tuned in to those phonemes that where she knew that she was going to have to slow down and spend more time.
Mm-hmm.
Forget the pacing guide of Haggerty,
Yes.
forget the pacing guide of Wilson.
Right.
She knew where she was going to have to slow down
Mm-hmm.
and spend some more time and pull out those mirrors and do some
Mm.
multisensory things
Mm-hmm.
and really get kids to be tuned into the language.
Yes.
And so I'm saying that to say that we do see that our assessments don't really make way for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, teachers have a hard time in figuring out, and teachers know that this child might not have an impairment, but my assessment isn't allowing me
Yes.
to really draw out what I need.
Right. Right.
And then, of course, on the topic of dyslexia, working at a school for children who have dyslexia, the testing for dyslexia or psychoed evaluations is just so expensive.
Yes.
And so if parents don't know what they have access to through the schools, or parents feel like what they're going to get through the schools is not of high quality, that they need to seek a private psychoed, well, that just becomes so incredibly
Oh,
expensive.
yes.
And so
Yes.
we're back to that issue of access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this conversation of teacher preparedness has come up many times in just this short conversation that we've had. And so and that's another conversation that I'm hearing generally across the board, is that, boy, these universities need to ramp up. They need to kind of look at the reality of what they're preparing people to do. And I can't tell you how many times we've trained teachers that say, why wasn't I ever taught any of this when I was in college? And they're angry about it, and I don't blame them. So I think that has also come to light, and I'm hoping we're going to see some changes at the university level to get these people get prepared for reality, you know?
One thing I can say that's happening in Georgia, well, first, to acknowledge your point around teachers being frustrated, yes, I also see teachers being angry,
Mm-hmm.
and they're also grieving, right? Because if
Yes.
you've been in, education 10, 15, 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and you're looking back and you're thinking about Ryan, and you're
Mm,
thinking about Esther, and you're
mm,
thinking about Michael
mm.
from the early 1990s, and you just can't unsee it,
Yes.
because
Yes.
now that you're learning all this new information, you're like, I knew what I could have done
Yes.
now to help Michael or to help Ryan.
Yes.
So I think that is a real thing, and teachers just grieving and feeling really badly about that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, National Center on Teaching Quality, I love what the information they're putting out, and the data that, like, for example, organizations like Excel and Ed are putting out, for us to really take a look at what's happening in our state.
Mm,
Because national, we can do this, have national talks, but
mm,
really we've got to be at the state level and at the
mm-hmm.
local level,
Mm-hmm.
saying what is happening in our state. Last year, 2023, Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia signed our Early Literacy Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that Early Literacy Act not only implicates the Department of Education, but also implicates the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning for
Mm,
0 to 5,
mm,
also implicates the Professional Standards Commission and the University System of Georgia.
mm,
And so, yeah, over the last 18 months, Georgia's been doing a lot. Our
mm-hmm.
colleges and universities have been doing a lot
Mm-hmm.
to really align themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
this should not be seen as, at least in my professional opinion, as an SLP, because we have this framework. It's called evidence-based practice. It's a
Mm-hmm.
process framework. It's not evidence-based practice like teachers talk about it
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, like a set of practices.
Mm-hmm.
EBP in the speech and language world is really about the dynamic process of deciding what's best for your client.
Mm,
It's a triangle with 3 sides. We say
mm,
all of the sides are equal: family and client perspectives, external and internal research, and
mm-hmm.
then clinician clinician expertise.
Got it.
It's all these sides of the triangle that we integrate. We take that internal evidence, that data from the student.
Mm-hmm.
We take that external evidence, this, decades and decades old research.
Mm-hmm.
We take the what's important to the families. We integrate that to decide, what are we going to provide to this student or to this group of students.
Mm,
And the reason why I'm raising this in the context of teacher preparation is because policy is not enough. It's a start, but it's
mm-hmm.
not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be in a position where policy stipulates this and that,
Mm-hmm.
this and that. We want to be in a place where we are relying on professional acumen
Mm-hmm.
of our professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way to do that is through what you and I are talking
Mm-hmm.
about. How do we shore up our colleges and universities? So for me, it's less about, because as a professor myself, I wouldn't want somebody to tell me, do this, do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to be teaching what is current,
Mm-hmm.
what is evidence-based,
Mm-hmm.
and preparing teachers to be able to, be critical and interrogate literature and research in a
Mm-hmm.
way that right now teachers are not.
Right.
We don't
Right.
want to be at the mercy of, policy here, like
Yes. Yes.
pulling us in either direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
do obviously appreciate policy, but recognize we're going to win this war. Thinking about Tracy Whedon's words, we're
Yes.
going to win this when our teachers have the acumen that they need.
Yeah, I love that. And I love her too. Um, well, just to kind of wrap this up a little bit, this has been a fascinating conversation. I could talk to you forever. But what kind of advice would you give to teachers and parents at this point from your perspective? What can you what can you offer to them?
Okay. So I'm so glad with this question too. So for teachers, I would say to, do all that they can to advocate for themselves and
Mm,
advocate for their students.
mm,
There is so much information now that's out there about structured literacy, the
mm,
science of reading, what's best for kids.
mhm,
If, teachers, I think, familiarizing themselves with that, going to
mhm,
websites like the National Center on Improving Literacy, IDA, International Dyslexia Association, and others, ASHA, to compile information, for example, to share, to sort of manage up, share with the coaches in their building, share with the assistant principals, share with the principals, share with their legislatures, because I think teachers, we've got to position teachers again out front. They're going to help us win this, not the senators, not the policymakers, not the bigwigs. Like, the teachers are going to help us win this. So for teachers to be armed with the information they need, so when somebody comes and says, hey, we're going to we're going to do a running records. Wait a minute. Teachers got to say, hey, let me tell you what I've recently learned about running records. Let me tell, and not just in a clear and concise expert way.
Yes.
Because teachers have got to be equipped with that. So I feel like my advice to teachers, get yourself in a position to be able to do that so that you've got your talking points and you can say, hey, I know what's best for my kids and here's what I need to be able to do that.
Yes.
I need pre-planning time.
Yes.
I need a sensitive progress monitoring tool.
Yes.
I haven't heard from my SLP in months. I want some strategies that are generalizable to the classroom for my kids who are having difficulty with receptive language or working memory, right? Like, for teachers to say, here's what I need.
Advocate for yourself. Yes.
Advocate for yourself. And then and knowing where to go and get that good information and those good talking points. You don't have to write that stuff up on your own. It's out there for, to find. And then for families, well, I'm in Georgia. And so obviously I'm in the South. I'm from Michigan.
Oh, you are? Oh,
yeah.
All right.
I'm from Detroit, Michigan.
You are?
I am. Are you?
We are in Michigan. We're about a half hour from Detroit.
Where at?
Troy, Michigan.
Oh, of course I know Troy.
Yeah.
My aunt lives in Lathrop. My dad is in Shelby Township.
Oh my gosh.
I'll be in Michigan in a couple of weeks.
Well, come on by and say hi. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Born and raised in Michigan, but live in Georgia. And I remember last year when families were down in Florida at board meetings, state school board meetings or local school board meetings, and in Georgia and in other southern states. Maybe it was happening around the country, but I was seeing this on the news all the time. And families were saying, so whatever side you're on this debate, that's not the point. The point is the power of informed demand and what families can do. Families were down at the school board meeting saying, I don't want my kid reading this book. I don't want my kid reading that book. I want these books banned. I don't want this topic of slavery or desegregation being talked about. And we saw the power of families. We started seeing legislation. We started seeing book bans. We started seeing things happening around the country. And a lot of that, in my opinion, I don't have no empirical evidence to support this, but in my opinion, it was because of that families were raising hell. So we need families in the fight against illiteracy to be raising hell. And in my opinion, there are resources out there, again, like the National Center on Improving Literacy, the Cox Campus, Florida Center for Reading Research, that has curated information for families in order for families to be able to advocate for their children.
Yeah, so that the information's out there for you to find. I mean, and it would be great to list some of those in our show notes too for people who might be looking for some places for research. Well, gosh, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. It took a little time to get this organized, but we did it. I'm glad we did it. Any parting words before you are off to your conference? Hopefully you're going to have a good conference in Seattle there.
I hope so. It should be great.
Yeah.
The time difference is it's breaking me down a little bit, but I'll be okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to y'all for inviting me to have this conversation. I'm really grateful anytime to be able to talk about these issues. I do want to say that even in spite of all that we know needs to be fixed, or that is broken right now in our country, I'm incredibly hopeful because we have teachers in front of students every day. We've got committed school leaders. We've got committed parents. We've got committed folks like you and I who are trying to make a difference, and it's making a difference.
Mm.
It's making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to figure out how we can accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no doubt that collectively we're going to turn things around for kids in our country and ultimately generations. And so I'm really hopeful.
Well, I love that. And it's so nice to hear someone with a positive attitude and hope for the future. And so that's the perfect place to end. And again, thank you so much and good luck with everything you're doing.
Well, thank you. I hope we can stay in touch.
I hope so too. And I love Dr. Tracy Whedon. You know, she's from Detroit too, you know.
Of course I know that.
Yes. So she's awesome. I love her. We should all meet in Detroit and do something together.
Yeah.
Do something important.
I'd be down for that.
Okay. All right.
Well,
bye,
y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Orton Gillingham Podcast, a BrainSpring production. For additional content, please subscribe to our newsletter, visit our website at brainspring.com, or follow us on social media. To submit questions or comments, please email us at podcast@brainspring.com. Your feedback is always welcome.